Chapter 6. Gideon frowned, feeling like the biggest heel alive. You're going to hold against me something I did when I was 16? That was 10 years ago. Brittany shook her head. I know it sounds like I'm being ridiculous, but even then, I knew you were the love of my life. I've never been able to stop loving you, Gideon, but I've also never been able to completely trust you again. He closed his eyes. So why did you marry me? I'm still not sure. I know that I want to be around you every day for the rest of my life. It's almost like there's some part of me that wants to be tortured by you. It doesn't make sense, but it is the truth. I don't want to love you anymore. But I just can't seem to stop myself. I don't want you to stop loving me, because I never stopped loving you. I tried very hard. Have you noticed that in all the years since our breakup, I haven't dated anyone else? Every other woman I've met in my entire life has been compared to you, and found lacking. I've never dated anyone else either, Brittany said softly. Of course, it would have been a lot harder for her to date with her brother and sister tagging along, but she hadn't even been tempted. You have to know that the reason we've never dated other people is we belong together. We're meant to be together every day for the rest of our lives. Brittany looked down, not able to meet the heat in his blue-gray eyes. I do think we're meant to be together. And I still don't trust you. I don't know where that leaves me, but I'm sitting here very confused. But you love me? Gideon said, grasping on to the only good thing that had come from this conversation. Of course I love you, you big dunderhead. I wouldn't have married you without loving you. It wouldn't have tortured me as much or allowed me to live with as much angst. I feel like I'm living in the middle of some new adult romance. You have to tell me how I can fix this. How can I prove to you that you can trust me again? I'll do just about anything for you, Brittany. But I'm sure you know that, because I've always been that way. She sighed. It's such an awkward position to be in, because I love you with everything inside me, but I can't trust you with my heart. So where do we stand? He cupped her face in his hands. Maybe we could try starting over. After all these years? You've lost your mind. He lowered his lips to hers, teasing hers, his hands never leaving her face. He kissed her with all of his love and all of his passion that was reserved just for her. When he lifted his head, she looked dazed and slightly confused. I like that a lot more than I should. He lowered his head again, deepening the kiss. If this was the only way he could convince her that he loved her, then he would kiss her until the end of time. This time when he looked down at her again, she sighed. Take me to bed, Gideon. You're right. We're married. There's no reason to wait. His conscience told him it wasn't the right thing to do, but he ignored it. It was his wedding night, and he loved her more than he had ever dreamed it was possible to love another human. Asterisk. When Brittany woke up the next morning, the bed was empty beside her. She rolled to her side and felt a teardrop drip down and roll across the pillow. Gideon hadn't even been there when she woke up. What on earth was wrong with her that he couldn't stick around for that long? She was just starting to swing her feet out of bed when he entered the room, a tray in his hands. I brought you breakfast in bed. He waited for her to move into a sitting position with her back against the headboard, and then he lowered the tray to her lap. She looked at the flower in the vase and smiled. The roses aren't blooming yet. He sat down in a chair beside the bed and smiled at her. The roses do as they're told. Her eyes widened as she understood his meaning. You grew this for me? He smiled. How could I not have a rose for my beautiful bride? Of course I grew it for you. She took a bite of the eggs he'd cooked and shrugged. They weren't great, but they weren't terrible. There's an African violet that my mom loved dying on the windowsill. It's been trying to die since a few months after she was gone, but I've kept it barely alive. Gideon stood up and walked to the violet in question, putting one finger in the dirt and asking it to grow. My bride wants you to be big and beautiful. Will you grow for me? He didn't have to look to know the flower was growing. She gasped, staring at it. He grinned at her. Didn't you believe I could do it? Sure, I did, but seeing it is so much more powerful than just believing it's possible. It's so beautiful, Gideon. We'll have to make sure to put this in a place of honor when we get home. She smiled at that. Home. Your house has always felt like it should be home to me, as crazy as that seems. It doesn't seem crazy at all. I think our home holds part of our magic, or whatever you want to call it. It seems to welcome those who belong there. I know some of my aunts said that about the house, my mother has always said it, and Claire said it, too. You belong to the McClains, so the house welcomed you. I like that idea. Whether it's true or not, I'm going to choose to believe it. He grinned at her. I woke up early to make you breakfast in bed. That was very kind. Wait, who are you and what have you done with my Gideon? He doesn't get up before noon if he has a choice. He laughed. I wanted to make you smile, so I did something special for you. Isn't that what I'm supposed to do? She nodded, surprised though. He was treating her, well, like he really was in love with her. Someday she might be able to believe that. I have a lot to do today, she said, changing the subject from the difficult one they were discussing. Lots of packing to finish up. I'm trying to decide if I want to have an estate sale, or just call one of the local charities to come get the furniture here. You could also put it in storage for Madison and Caden. They may want it a few years down the road. They may. I think I'm going to donate it though, if you don't mind. It seems like the right thing to do. Absolutely, Gideon said with a nod. We use donations on the ranch, and we often dress the boys in donated clothes. But only after Mom makes sure there are no tears or stains, and they're in perfect condition. Do the boys mind donated clothes? Truthfully, with most of the boys, they're fed and clothed better at the ranch than they ever were with their parents. None of them have ever complained about it, that's for sure. His words made her think of Nick, one of the boys she knew was in his house now. She knew he'd never been able to talk to her about the boys really, but she got information from their files, and now that she was his wife, she was pretty sure things would be different. How's Nick doing? Gideon nodded, smiling a bit. I think he's talked about everything that's happened to him with Adam now. Daniel is no longer in pain if he brushes up against him. Truly, it's like he's a different kid. Adam says it always takes about 6 months for the tough ones, and I think he was right this time. I'm so glad. I've worried about him a lot. I was there the day they brought him in, and he was devastated. It was a tough day for Adam. I think we could all tell. Adam can take it. We're all a team, you know. I do know that. I've always been impressed by how seamless you all make it seem. There are 7 brothers, many employees, but you make it seem like you're in sync. Does that make sense? He nodded. We try hard. At this moment, Adam is in charge, but now that I'm married, I'll slowly take the reins. He'll still work with the boys as the ranch psychiatrist, but he won't deal with the day-to-day running of the ranch, and I'll no longer be one of the counselors. Is that a job you want? She asked, surprised that Adam would step down. Gideon shrugged. I've always known the job would be mine, and so have my brothers. It's how things work for us. Your family is very rooted in tradition. I guess I knew that on some level, but seeing just how much is a little surprising. She finished her eggs and pushed the tray away. Thank you for breakfast in bed. You're welcome. And let me know if there are any other plants you need help with. She grinned. There are some flowers outside, some cannas that Mom just loved. Think you and Benjamin could dig them up and replant them at the ranch? Yup. In fact, he pulled his phone out of his pocket and called Benjamin. When his brother answered, he said simply, I've got a plant emergency. 5 minutes later, he'd hung up. You might want to get dressed, because he's bringing over Caleb and the 6 boys that are theirs. They're going to plant them on the south side of the house, because Benjamin says they'll grow best there. She flung herself at him, wrapping her arms around him. Thank you. She had tears in her eyes. I know that doesn't seem like a big deal to you, but those flowers were my mother's pride and joy. Not you? She shook her head. Definitely not me. My dad was a drifter. He came into her life and left her pregnant with me a few months later. She didn't marry my stepdad until I was 8, and he was never terribly fond of me. I didn't know that. I thought the man who raised you was your father. No, but I wasn't allowed to talk about it. For some reason, Mom was absolutely ashamed that I wasn't his, so I was required to call him Dad from the day they married. I honestly thought everyone knew. It's not like this is a big town. Did he adopt you? She nodded. Yeah, he made it legal, but I'm not sure why. It was pretty obvious it's not something he wanted to do. I'm sorry. I think children should always feel wanted and loved. I do my best to make my brother and sister feel that way. And I promise I'll do my best with our boys. She gulped thinking about it. All 7 of them. He chuckled. Who doesn't want to have 7 sons, one of them with powers? Imagine how it was for my mom when all of us had powers. She was only expecting me to. Oh, no. So how did she find out it was a 7th generation thing? Brittany asked. Well, my family has always kept amazingly detailed records of the powers we have. There are lots of papers up in the attic, and a lot more that my grandmother insisted needed to be filmed onto microfiche. She actually bought her own machine to do it, because she couldn't deal with the idea of anyone else finding out. Really? She tilted her head to one side, thinking about what he'd said. Would you have a problem if I looked at the records? Not at all. He noticed her face light up, and he looked at her closely. What are you going to do with these records? She shrugged. I've dabbled in writing for years. I think your family history would make a wonderful series of romance books, don't you? I could start as far back as you can trace your family and write about every 7th son and how he found love. Are you kidding? You've been writing? Yeah, but I haven't told anyone. And I know I'm not going to have time to do it anytime soon. Maybe it would be a good retirement project for me. You know, when our 7th son marries and takes over the house. Gideon grinned. Sounds like a good time for it to me. Maybe you can make some notes for those books in between diaper changes, cooking for Friday night barbecues, helping with math homework, and keeping our little fire starter from flaming the house. Fire starter? Oh, don't give me nightmares, Gideon McClain. I want my 7th son to have an easy power. Like maybe he can make people and objects from books come alive. Wouldn't that be a fun power? Just don't ever let him read Puff the Magic Dragon. Or any of the Harry Potter books. Can you imagine having Voldemort running around our living room, yelling, Avada Kedavra, at everyone who angers him? She grinned. I should probably put some clothes on. I'm wearing shorts today, so I can get more done. I refuse to be uncomfortable while packing up my house. He caught her by the shoulders and kissed her. I love you, Brittany McClain, and if it takes the rest of my life, you're going to believe me and trust me again. I promise you this. Chapter 7. By the time Monday rolled around, Brittany felt a great deal more comfortable with Gideon, but she was still unsure about stepping into Lillian's shoes. When they drove to the ranch together on Monday morning, Gideon headed straight to the cabin he had shared with Frank, and Brittany went to the big house. She found Lillian supervising all of the ranch hands in the proper loading of a moving truck. You don't have to go this morning, Brittany protested. She'd been looking forward to some time with Lillian to learn everything she needed to learn. Yes, I do. You are not starting out your marriage with your mother-in-law living in the house with you. I want you to still love me in 6 months. Brittany frowned, but she knew Lillian was right. She needed to learn to stand on her own 2 feet as quickly as possible. Where are my 2? She asked, wondering why they weren't helping at all. They're both still sleeping. They were tired. Brittany rolled her eyes. They'll be down in a few minutes to help. Which rooms did you put them in? Lillian grinned at her, her eyes sparkling. There are only 2 rooms upstairs, with the doors shut. You may do what you need to do. Brittany took the stairs 2 at a time, opening the first closed door she saw. Her sister was sitting up in bed, playing on her phone. You told Lillian you were too tired to help so you could text someone? Get out of bed, get dressed, and get down there. Now. Madison sighed, as if she was greatly put upon, but she got out of bed and started rummaging through a drawer. Do you mind? This is my room. You can leave. Brittany counted to 10, left the room, and hurried to the next one with the door shut. Her brother was sprawled face down in bed, and didn't appear to have any intention of getting up, ever. Get up. You need to get dressed and get downstairs to help. I can't believe you didn't just volunteer. Caden opened one eye and studied his sister. Are you mad? Up. Caden got up and headed straight for the shower, which he should have done more than 30 minutes before. Brittany hurried back down the stairs. I'm so sorry, Lillian. I promise you, I'm raising them to have manners and be willing to help others. I never blame the mother for what the child does, or the sister in your case. You've been very good to them. Brittany scowled. Maybe too good, if they don't think they need to help. The ranch hands hurried in and out of the house with box after box. I'm sure going to miss this place, Lillian said softly, running her hand along the table. This is an antique. It's been here for at least 5 generations. I had to strip it and sand it once, and I've heard all the other brides did, too. But it holds up like nothing I've ever seen. Don't replace it, we'll refinish it together when the time comes. Walking to her mother-in-law, Brittany linked arms with her. I promise, I will keep everything I can. But 7 sons can trash things. Lillian chuckled. Don't I know it? My 7 sons did everything they could to tear this house apart. It must be a boy thing. Brittany rested her head on Lillian's shoulder. I'm not sure I'm ready for this. I'm sure you are. I'll be just across the ranch, and I'll help as much as you need me. But you will need to let me know if and when you need me. I don't want to get in the way of what you have going. All that's going to depend on how quickly Adam and Tiffany can replace me. I'm not leaving them without someone to work for them, and I think Gideon would rather murder someone than spend one more day going to the office as my replacement. We'll put feelers out today. Well, they will. I'm going to get settled into my new home today. Lillian turned to look at her kitchen one last time. I'm really going to miss that kitchen, you know. I've made so many meals there. Brittany hated that Lillian felt like she had to leave, but she understood it was the way the McClains did things. You are welcome to come every Friday and help me cook. You didn't think to leave any of your Friday night recipes for me, did you? Lillian chuckled. Let's do a quick kitchen tour. She led Brittany to a small shelf, which she opened to reveal cookbooks. And not just any cookbooks. These were handwritten cookbooks. She pulled one out and opened it. These are the cookies that I make for the boys. There are 20 different recipes I rotate through, and each one makes enough for all the boys, and all 7 of my sons. And there are a few left over for the house, and some for the ranch hands. I make those on Mondays usually. Brittany grinned. I've eaten my share of your cookies over the years. Because you've always been one of us. Lillian pulled out another cookbook. This is for the Friday night barbecues. There are 30 or so different things I've cooked for Friday nights over the years, and each one has notes on who likes it. Remember, we're still trying to keep Hunter on low fat, so you're going to want to make special things for him. He doesn't mind, and he actually gets excited to eat foods that won't make him sick. Oh, good. I was wondering how he was handling the new diet. I'm sure it's not easy on him. Lillian shrugged. In his cabin, they keep food available that works for him. The other boys can have what they want, but Frank is still following his diet with him. It might be nice if we did rotisserie chickens or something on Friday nights, so everyone could eat the same thing. I think I'm going to stick to your tried and true recipes for now. I'm a little nervous about branching out on my own. That's fine, but remember you have Claire to help you. This first Friday, I'll be here to help as well. I know you're still going to be working. I think you should have Gideon fill in that day, though. Isn't Gideon about to be the person running the entire ranch? Brittany asked, a little surprised his mother would suggest him filling in for her in the office. Well, sure, but that doesn't mean he doesn't need to work around here. The thing with Gideon is we were always careful never to give him a particular job that he could own. We wanted him to know every single task on the ranch, so he would be a more skilled and benevolent leader. Brittany smiled at that. I think you've succeeded. He can do just about anything. Her eyes widened. Oh. I have to get something from the truck. She rushed out the door and came back in carrying her mother's African violet. This thing was my mother's, and it's been trying to die for years, and Gideon made it bloom for me again. It's beautiful. Lillian smiled as Brittany flitted around the kitchen, trying to find the best place for it. I think the windowsill, Brittany finally said. What do you think? That's perfect. Lillian let Brittany admire it for a minute before she showed her the special features in her kitchen. We have triple ovens, 2 cooktops. Brittany was overwhelmed with the kitchen, but she paid careful attention and nodded. I hope you made a book for the kitchen, too. Lillian laughed. Of course I did. You're going to be just fine. Brittany hugged her mother-in-law. Stay close. I'm going to drown. You'll swim beautifully. Madison and Caden meandered down the stairs then, and Brittany glared at them both. You're both going to help around here. A lot. Madison sighed. I figured since we were part of the family, we wouldn't have to work. Lillian hid a laugh behind her hand. Really? You don't think the brothers work? They work harder than anyone I've ever seen. So you can work just as hard as they do after that comment. Brittany glared. Start helping carry boxes out. They're making room for our stuff. Both teens immediately got to work as Brittany shook her head. They're going to need breakfast before school, Lillian said gently. Got any Pop-Tarts? As a matter of fact, we do. Lillian went into her pantry and pulled out a box of Pop-Tarts. There we go. Instant breakfast. They can eat on the bus. Brittany herself hurried off to work a short while later, saying a silent prayer that Adam and Tiffany had found time to at least start looking for someone else. When she walked into the office, she stopped short. Who are you? There was a woman sitting in her chair. The woman jumped up. I'm sorry. You must be Brittany. I was told this was your job, and you were just going to train me. I'm an interim administrative assistant, just here because of the close friendship the GOG has with the McClains. My name is Mildred. Brittany frowned. What's the GOG? Oh, you've never heard of us? We're the Guild of Godmothers. You know, from Everland, Wyoming? Every time we've been in a pinch, the McClains have helped us out, so now that the McClains are in a pinch, I've been sent to help you. You'll need to spend the day-to-day training me, but after that, you'll be free to do your own thing. The woman was older, with gray hair pulled back into a bun and blue eyes that danced. Okay, does Adam know you're here? Brittany was getting a little more confused by the moment. Yes, Adam was the one who called the guild on Saturday, asking for help. You're not upset, are you? Brittany shook her head. Not upset. Just a bit stunned. She shrugged. No mind. I wanted to be able to stop working, and this will make it possible. I should be thanking you, instead of staring at you like you're a circus animal. That would be rather nice, the sweet old lady said. Now, show me what you want me to do. Throughout the day, as they chatted, she learned more and more of the Guild of Godmothers that were all located in Everland, Wyoming. One of your husband's dear great-aunts, or is that great-great-aunts? Well, whichever it was, one of them was invited to be a godmother, and she now lives in Everland with us. By the end of the day, Brittany was sure Mildred was ready to take her place. She was a quick learner, and she seemed very excited about helping Adam and Tiffany for a while. Make sure you don't forget to place an ad, so a permanent person can take your place, she told Brittany as she was leaving for the day. I already did. Thank you so much for stepping in to make the transition easier. I wasn't looking forward to waiting until someone could be found to fill my shoes. Oh, my dear, no one will ever fill your shoes. You are one of a kind. The godmother turned back to her desk to straighten it up at the end of the day. Brittany hoped the woman knew to act normal when there were people outside the family there watching. Brittany walked in the door at 3:30, earlier than she usually got off. She wanted to be home when her two miscreant siblings showed up, so they could go to the house and pack up her car with another load. Then she realized it would be much smarter to take a truck. She pulled her phone out to call Gideon. Hi there, Gideon's deep voice said, and her heart started racing. Why him and no other man? Hi. Did you know I was replaced today? Brittany asked. No. Is this a good thing or a bad thing? I think it's definitely a good thing. I won't have to work after today. Do you mind if I borrow your truck? My truck? You know how Texas men feel about their trucks. I do, Brittany said with a grin. I need to bring a load of boxes over from my old house. I can't fit very many in my car. Gideon sighed. Let me grab a couple of boys, and we'll all go in my truck. All? She asked, surprised. Can we fit 6? I was just thinking about you and me and boys. You know what? Instead, send just Caden, and he can help. You and Madison can start unpacking what you have there. But we didn't bring anything, she protested. You didn't. I made a few trips today. Look upstairs in the master bedroom. The door opened then, and Madison and Caden hurried in. Madison put her books down and headed into the kitchen. They were already a little too at ease there. Sounds good. They just got home. I'll give them a snack and then send Caden out. Love you, Gideon said softly before hanging up. He didn't give her a chance to reply, which was good, because she wasn't sure she could respond the way he wanted. She loved him, but there was still something holding her back. After she put her phone away, she followed her siblings into the kitchen. Snack fast. Gideon is coming to get you in a few minutes, Caden. He's grabbing 2 other boys, and the 4 of you are going to load boxes into his truck and bring them back. Madison, you're going to help me unpack the boxes. He's been shuffling back and forth all day. Madison frowned. We were in school all day. We're tired. You're helping. Brittany didn't mention she was tired as well. It wasn't easy to train a godmother to do office work all day. Chapter 8. Gideon pulled up in front of the house 10 minutes later, and he jumped out, followed by Hunter and Nick. When Nick walked into the house and saw Brittany, he frowned. Where's Lillian? Brittany's eyes met Gideon's. She moved into another house across the ranch. Gideon and I are living here now with my brother and sister. You kicked Lillian out of her house? The anger on Nick's face was obvious, and Gideon rushed over to put his hand on his shoulder, sending him calmness. Why? Gideon answered. In my family, the youngest son inherits the house the day he marries. We waited a couple of days, and we asked them to stay, but they said they had to follow tradition. So we're here at the house, but Lillian and Peter are still here on the ranch. Does that mean no more Lillian days? Nick's voice was soft. His days with Lillian in the past 6 months had been some of the happiest of his life. Not necessarily, Gideon said. Now there will be Brittany days, and I think Mom would do one last Lillian day with you, if you wanted. Nick sighed. I want to. I'm going to miss her. You're still going to see her, Brittany protested. I am not taking her place. I'm very fond of Lillian myself. Hunter looked back and forth between the others. It's really going to be strange to come to this house and not have her rush out of the kitchen to see us, telling us that we're her boys. Who's going to bring us cookies every Tuesday? Nick asked. Brittany frowned. I won't be able to tomorrow, because I have to unpack my things, but by this time next week, I'll be a cookie-baking maniac. Gotta be a maniac to marry Gideon, Hunter said, a grin on his face. You got a Hunter-friendly snack in your kitchen, Brittany? Let me go check. She knew about Hunter's stomach issues, as did everyone else on the ranch. She went into the pantry to dig for something. She pulled out a bag of pretzels. Pretzels are fat-free. Hunter grinned. I'll take some to go, please. Gideon shook his head. If he hadn't been so sick, I don't know that I'd let him steal pretzels. It's not stealing when they're given with love. Brittany stuck her tongue out at her husband as she found a Ziploc baggie and put a generous portion of pretzels into it. Hunter grinned as he took the baggie. Do you have any bottled water? Lillian always kept some for me. Brittany hurried to the fridge and found some, handing it to him. Do you want anything, Nick? Not if you haven't had time to make cookies yet. Next week, though, right? I promise, I will bake cookies next week. Brittany couldn't believe how set in their ways these boys were. She knew their backgrounds, and before they'd come to the ranch, there had been little for any of them. They knew where the good food on the ranch was kept, though. In Brittany's commercial refrigerator. After the men had loaded into the truck, Brittany turned to Madison. It's time for us to get upstairs and get to unpacking. The faster we get it done, the sooner we can rest for a minute or two. Madison groaned. I thought living on the ranch was going to be an endless parade of teenage boys in and out of the house. These are all the boring boys I already know from school. Life is really rough, isn't it? Secretly, Brittany was thrilled that Madison's hopes for new boys had been squashed. She needed no more boys in her life. Asterisk. Gideon noticed that Caden wasn't thrilled about having to work by the way he stomped toward the truck. His emotions were screaming that it wasn't fair as well. It's your stuff, Caden. We're willing to help move it, but you have to be there. What if we don't get the stuff you want? Caden just shrugged. Wouldn't be the end of the world. I stayed at your house all weekend, and your sister and I spent a lot of time making sure everything was packed up and ready to move. We didn't waste all that time, did we? Because I'd be thrilled to take your boxes to the thrift store. You can't do that. You're not my dad. No, I'm not your dad. I'm not Nick or Hunter's dad either, but they've learned to respect me, and you will too. Now, which way do you want it? Do you want to help move your stuff? Or do you want the three of us to take it to the thrift store on our own? Gideon wasn't bluffing. He didn't believe in bluffing. Once he made a threat, he'd follow through, no matter how upset a boy became. I'll help. But you can take my sister's stuff to the thrift store. It doesn't work that way. We will all get your sister's stuff first, and yours last. You have heard the saying ladies first, right? We practice that here on the ranch. Caden glared at him. Everyone talks about how cool you are, but you're mean. For the first time since they'd gotten into the truck, Nick said something. You know, I've only been on the ranch for about 5 months. Maybe a little longer. And I've noticed something. The brothers expect us to work hard, but they always thank us for the work we do, and they work right along with us. Not to mention we get a weekly paycheck for the hours we work. What do you know? Caden asked. A lot. Let me tell you something, Caden. We're treated like real human beings on this ranch. Maybe you're used to that where you come from, but for most of us boys, that wasn't the case. I've been treated better by the strangers that took me in on this ranch than I've ever been treated in my life. For the first time, I look forward to getting up in the mornings, so get that chip off your shoulder, and get ready to pull your weight. The ranch is awesome, and none of us are going to let you turn it into something less than it is. Caden stared at Nick, shocked into silence. Gideon gave Nick a mental high five, planning to talk to him later about what his words meant, and how much maturity they'd showed. Nick's past was something he'd finally opened up about, and they were all thrilled, because until he admitted what had happened, the healing couldn't happen. And Nick needed healing more than most. He pulled into the driveway, and Caden was the first out of the truck, hurrying into the house. Gideon understood that it was the only home the boy had ever known, and this was rough for him, but he also knew that he was in the best place for any of them. Gideon clapped Nick on the shoulder as they walked toward the house. He said very softly, "I'm proud of you." Nick's face brightened and he stood taller, walking with a bit of a swagger. "I'll do all I can to help." "I know you will." Gideon looked over his shoulder at Hunter. "How are you feeling?" "I'm a little worried about you since you ate." Hunter grinned. "I had fat-free stuff. And even when I don't, and I'm not super careful, that stuff Maria gave me is really helping. I hate drinking it, because it does taste like dirt mixed with mint, but it really does help my stomach." Gideon started to put his hand on the boy's stomach to gauge the truth of what he said, but he held back. Daniel had been working with him, and Daniel was a full-fledged doctor. There was no reason for the ranch's resident Gideon to check him out. 30 minutes later, the truck was loaded and they were on their way back to the ranch. Most of the conversation in the truck was the boys talking about school. "I got an A on my algebra test today, Gideon." "For once I wasn't spending every class in the bathroom," Hunter said. "No one can believe the change in me at school." Gideon rolled his eyes. "We kept telling them you weren't faking." "I know you did." They didn't want to believe it. Hunter grinned. "I'm a troubled teen, after all." "Yeah. Right. You're anything but a troubled teen." Caden looked at Gideon. "But they've all been in trouble. Isn't that why they're here at the ranch?" "Some of them have. Some of them are here because they lost their parents. All of them are here because the outside world failed them somehow, and they needed love, the kind of love the McClains specialize in." Caden looked back out the window. "Do you really believe all that nonsense?" 3 voices answered him, filling the truck. "Yes." "Brainwashed," Caden mumbled under his breath, shaking his head. Gideon ignored the boy, knowing he simply didn't understand the ranch. He'd been in a rougher spot than most of the boys when his parents had died. If it hadn't been for Brittany, there was no telling where he would have ended up. Of course, Caden didn't even think about thanking Brittany for sacrificing for him. She'd had a full-ride scholarship to SMU that she'd turned down so she could raise her siblings. And they only complained to her. He needed to find a way to remind them that they were fortunate to have her. Asterisk. Brittany hated that Gideon was gone most of the evening. When he finally got home, it was past 10. Sure, he'd brought several loads of boxes with the boys' help, but she'd wanted his time as well. She was in the kitchen, heating up supper leftovers when he came in, and she turned to him. Maybe we can find a godmother to take over your role with the boys so I can see you on occasion. He chuckled. Sorry. I work long hours, and I always have. Now that I'm married and about to take over the ranch, they'll find someone to work with Frank. Or maybe Lonnie will want to take my place. I don't know if it's been discussed. But you won't always work these hours? She asked. She already felt like a nagging wife, and she was sure they were supposed to be married longer than 3 days before that happened. No, I won't always work those hours. And I'll do most of my work from the study here in the house, just like Dad did. Good. She handed him a plate of food and followed him to the table. It's so weird that I won't be needed at work after today. I thought I'd be there for at least another month. I can't say I'm disappointed. I like the idea of you being home. Your brother, he's not at all appreciative of you, is he? Brittany sighed. It's hard to raise your siblings. Imagine if Adam had ended up raising you. Do you think you'd have been appreciative? Yeah, I do think so. I don't like the way he talks about you. Do I have your permission to treat him as a hostile witness? Shifting into lawyer mode again, Gideon? I guess you can do what you have to do. Don't treat him any differently than you would one of the boys you counsel. Gideon smiled. I was hoping you'd say that. You look like you have something devious up your sleeve. He's going to get the McClain treatment. Every one of us went through a phase where we felt like we were better than the boys' ranch boys, well except Kevin, but he doesn't count. Brittany grinned at the mention of the boy who had been left on their doorstep and raised with them. I like Kevin. Everyone likes Kevin. He's practically perfect in every way. He's a male Mary Poppins. Gideon shook his head. Anyway, every time one of us decided we were better than the boys' ranch boys, Dad would give us the treatment. We'd be out there working with them, we'd eat with them, and we'd have to earn any screen time. Life was much easier at home, and we learned to appreciate it. Sounds good to me. Treat him as you will. She watched as he finished his supper. How long before they find someone to take your place? I think they're already working on it. I'll be able to fill you in more tomorrow. He stood and stretched. You're not doing dishes tonight, are you? He asked when she picked up his plate and carried it into the kitchen. Thankfully his mother had put in a commercial dishwasher, and Brittany and Madison had mostly loaded it. I just need to stick this in the dishwasher and start it. Go on up. I'll be there in a minute. Gideon nodded, starting for the stairs. He heard voices coming from Madison's room, so he knocked. After a minute, she called, Come in. Who's in here with you? He asked. Nobody. I was talking to a friend, and I had her on speaker. Gideon concentrated to feel her emotions, but decided she was telling the truth. All right. Sleep well. Good night. Gideon went to his new bedroom, feeling strange that he was now in the master bedroom, though he'd always known it would one day be his. The past week had changed his life forever, and he couldn't help but be grateful for the girl who'd agreed to marry him, even with her misgivings. When Brittany entered the room, he pulled her down on his lap and simply buried his face in her neck. Have I told you yet today how much I love and appreciate you? Brittany smiled at that. You just say that 'cause you're worried I'm already pregnant. He pulled his head back and looked at her. I hadn't even considered that. She laughed. Hopefully we'll have a year or two. 4 would be good, because then my siblings would be out of the house before the babies started coming. Not happening. Just so you know. It never takes more than a year for the first baby, and after that they're like clockwork. It's very annoying. Well, I'll just have to do everything I can until then. Madison and I got all the boxes in here unpacked today, and we got most of her room. Caden's stuff isn't here yet. And when it is, he'll be unpacking it himself. It's not your job to unpack his room. He's lucky you cook for him, and that may be ending as well. She sighed. Madison's attitude isn't a whole lot better than Caden's. Well, I can't put her to work with the boys, because there'd be a conflict of interests there, but I can make him work. I'll tell you what, you bring her around, and I'll bring him around. If she doesn't want to behave, I'm sure Claire wouldn't mind a kitchen girl to do whatever she was told. Oh, that would be mean. Madison hates cooking. Then it sounds like the perfect punishment to me. But whatever you want. Just make sure neither of them are talking back to you in my presence. I won't stand for it. You gave up too much for them. She shrugged. I did what any loving human being would have done. Then they should appreciate the loving human being they got for their sister, shouldn't they? Chapter 9. True to his word, Gideon took Caden under his wing the very next day. Caden helped get the very last of the things Brittany was keeping moved to the big house, and then he started working doing the same chores as all the other boys on the ranch. He would come in tired at the end of the evening, and then have to do his homework. No longer was there unlimited screen time, and he had to earn every minute. He wasn't happy about the change, but he wasn't about to argue with Gideon. On Friday afternoon, Caden came home from school and collapsed at the dining room table, reaching for the snacks Brittany had put out as she was preparing Friday night supper for the entire ranch. Thankfully, she had Claire and Lillian at her side, helping her every step of the way. Brittany heard something from the dining room, so she hurried to find both of her siblings sitting quietly at the table talking. She stayed just out of sight and listened, Claire on one side of her and Lillian on the other. I feel like I've just planted every crop on the whole ranch with my own 2 hands. Gideon is a slave driver. Madison sighed heavily. It hasn't been much better for me. Brittany is making me help with everything. I'm surprised she hasn't already dragged me into the kitchen to help with Friday night supper. Maybe we should have been more grateful for how easy things were before Brittany got married. Now she's making us do things we probably should have done all along, Caden said. But we're not used to it, and it just might kill us both. It's not going to kill us. It'll make us stronger and better people and all that garbage. I guess we need to start appreciating Brittany. We should thank her for our easy good lives before. Don't you think? Brittany turned and looked at Lillian with wide eyes. They'd figured it out a lot faster than she'd expected. She couldn't wait to tell Gideon. Lillian, Brittany, and Claire headed back into the kitchen, carefully peeling potatoes. They'd decided to cook chicken breasts on the grill that night, so that Hunter could eat everything the others were eating and not feel quite so conspicuous. Madison came into the kitchen a few minutes later and leaned against the counter, offering another pair of hands to help the work process. Brittany wanted to grab her sister in a bear hug and give her a big smacking kiss on the cheek, but she also didn't want Madison to know that she'd listened. So she pointed to the small mountain of potatoes in the sink. Peel them, please. We're having mashed tonight. Madison walked over and picked up a knife without complaint, starting the process of peeling. When Caden came in 5 minutes later, he said, Gideon isn't here for me yet, so how can I help in the kitchen until he gets here? Help your sister peel potatoes, please, Lillian said, grinning at Brittany. I'm going to get the chicken out to the grill, Brittany said. I'll be back in a little bit. She picked up an ice chest filled with the marinating chicken, and was surprised when Caden took it from her. That's too heavy for you. You lead and I'll follow. Brittany winked at Claire as she left the house, followed by her brother. They went to the picnic pavilion beside the main house. Just set it down, and I'll get started. Do you have the fires going already? He asked. She nodded. I started them before I went in a short while ago. I can handle it. Caden stared at her in indecision for a moment. I know you can handle a lot more than you need to. How about letting me help you with it? Brittany nodded, stepping back. I appreciate the offer. Gideon walked over with Frank and their 6 boys. You need help, Brittany? Caden already offered. I could probably use 2 or 3 more boys if someone else would like to help me. What are you making? Hunter called. Grilled chicken for everyone. Brittany responded, grinning at him. I'm helping then. Hunter loved it when he could eat what the others ate. Me too. Nick called. I'll help too, Jose said, walking over to Brittany. Gideon shrugged at Frank. I guess that puts you in charge of Benjamin's minions tonight. Frank sighed heavily. Benjamin's bossy during planting season. I guess you should have married the woman in control of Friday night suppers. I'm happy with my wife, thanks. Frank led the other 3 boys off to work on the planting until supper. Gideon caught Brittany by the shoulders and pulled her in for a kiss. How do you want your troops arranged? She grinned. There are 4 huge grills. If we can have an MIT man each one, it would be very helpful. He frowned at her. MIT? You lost me. Man in training. That's what this ranch does, teaches boys to be men. He smiled. I can go with that. Walking over to Caden, he looked at how he was carefully putting each piece of meat on the grill with tongs. Good job. I think you've done this before. Caden shook his head. No. Never. But you've taught me if I'm going to do a job, I should do it well the first time. Gideon clapped Caden on the shoulder, grinning at his response. He wasn't so hard to teach after all. He walked around the circle, watching each of the boys as they manned their grill. Turning to Brittany, he frowned. We men are going to be hot and thirsty. Maybe a few bottles of water could be fetched for us. She shook her head. I should tell you to do it yourself, but I know you think that you have to supervise the grills, because you're a man. I'll handle it. Gideon shook his head at her as she walked back to the house. She makes me want to sing a song from the Muppet movie. Seriously? Nick asked. The Muppet movie? Yup. There's this great song that Kermit the Frog and Ralph the Dog sing together after Miss Piggy leaves Kermit high and dry. It's called, I Hope That Something Better Comes Along. Now I know she's just right for me, and I don't hope for something better for me, because there isn't, but, for mankind in general? Yes. Caden dug into his pocket and got out his phone, pulling the song up on YouTube. The boys were laughing hysterically at the lyrics when Brittany came back with the bottles of water. Oh, this song is fun, Brittany said. That was one of my favorite movies when I was a little girl. I had it on VCR, which most of you probably haven't seen. She walked to Gideon and handed him his water. You're making me feel old. You're my old lady, Gideon said with a laugh. The boys all chuckled, and she walked around giving them each a bottle of water. I'm not sure that's the kind of thing you should be teaching them, she said with a frown. Trust me, most of them could teach me a thing or two about the chauvinistic way men treat women. That's probably not good, she said, stopping in front of him. I'm going to go inside and help out with the rest of the meal. We've got the fire on low, so it's going to take an hour or so for the meat to cook. By then we'll have everything else done. Good. 'Cause we're all going to be really hungry by then, right, men? Yes, the 4 boys chorused as if they'd rehearsed it. She rolled her eyes and walked back toward the house with a grin on her face. Her brother was fitting in with these boys and making friends. He'd had a chip on his shoulder for so long, it was surprising to say the least. When it came time to eat a short while later, Madison offered to take Brittany's place in the serving line. Brittany frowned at her. Are you just wanting to check out every boy? Make sure you know them all? Not at all. I just want you to know that you're appreciated, and I think you should get to eat with your new husband. You're still a newlywed, after all. Brittany shrugged, happy to take the offer. That would be great. Her legs ached from the sheer number of hours she'd spent in the kitchen that day, preparing dinner rolls and making cherry cobblers. After she'd gotten her food and was walking toward the table where all of the McClains and their wives were sitting, she noticed a beautiful vase full of blue bonnets on the table. "What are the flowers for?" she asked. Gideon grinned at her. "For my beautiful wife on our 1-week anniversary." She couldn't help but smile, feeling special. Putting her lips against his ear, she asked, "Did you grow them yourself?" He laughed, hugging her close. "I didn't need to, because they're everywhere. I'll grow you some in the fall. They are my favorite flower. Then we'll make sure you always have some." Gideon sat down at the picnic table and watched her take the seat beside him. She enjoyed her time talking to the other brides, truly feeling like the others had become her sisters. At the end of the night, she was tired, but happy that her first Friday night supper had turned out so well. When she walked over to help with the dishes, she noticed all the boys were gone. Lillian had commanded her army of lost boys to do every dish that needed to be washed, and Brittany almost crumpled to the floor with relief. She'd had no idea how much cooking it really was, or how sore she'd be. Gideon slipped his arm around her, helping her up the stairs. He called back over his shoulder, "I'll be checking to make sure you're both in bed in 30 minutes. "We will be," Madison called back. When they were finally alone, Brittany sighed. "I think I might need a hot bath." He grinned. "Tonight? Or do you want to wait until tomorrow?" She thought about it for a minute. "I'm so tired I might just drown." "That's what I was worried about." He knelt at her feet and removed her shoes and then her socks. "The meal was fantastic. I had a lot of help, and I still feel like I'm going to die." "You did very well. Do you think you'll keep the tradition going?" She looked at him with shock on her face. "Absolutely. I wouldn't disappoint those boys for anything." She watched him as he massaged her feet for a moment. "I overheard my brother and sister talking today." "Oh, yeah?" They were talking about how good they'd had it before, and how they were going to be more appreciative. Both of them volunteered for work tonight. "I think they're afraid you're going to make them plant a whole field of crops by themselves." He laughed. "Hard work is good for them. And I'm glad they finally see what they have in you. They were really frustrating me before. I could tell." He got up off the floor and sat beside her on the edge of the bed. "So now that we've been married for a week, how do you feel about what's expected of you?" She shook her head. "You have to give me more time to answer that question. I spent half the week unpacking and fighting with Madison. Ask me again in a month, and I'll have an answer for you." She groaned softly. "Maybe you could find someone who gives massages to come here and take care of me. I'd be happy to give you one myself." "Really?" She looked at him skeptically. "I'd like that if you're willing." "Sure." His massages were a lot less massage than they were healing the sore muscles, but both would have the same effect in the end. She laid down on her stomach and folded her hands under her head. He started with her feet, drawing the pain from them. Moving on to her calves, he rubbed them a bit, but mostly just drew her pain into him, feeling it fade away. Brittany frowned. "I know you're using your healing on me, and it feels so good, I'm not even going to complain." He chuckled. "Good. Just let me help you." 20 minutes later, he was finished, and she was sound asleep. He found an extra blanket in the closet, and he pulled it over her instead of trying to tuck her into the bed. Kissing her cheek, he slipped from the room and went down the stairs to check on Madison and Caden. He found them sitting on the couch in the living room, talking to each other. "Time for bed." Neither of them argued. "Good night, Gideon," Caden said, hurrying up the stairs. "Good night, Caden," Gideon called back, pleased with the boy. "Good night, Gideon," Madison said. "Thanks for being so good to Brittany." She deserves it. Yes, she really does. He watched as she rushed up the stairs and to her room, shaking his head. They had 4 more years with those two, at least. He knew they'd have at least 4 children by that time. His mom had given them rooms at the other end of the hall from them, which was good. They'd want to fill the rooms near them with the babies. He walked through the house, shutting off all the lights and looking at the subtle changes she'd made that week. All of his mother's personal belongings were gone, but all of Brittany's things were added in. It looked good to him, and showed him just how much work she'd done that week. He was so glad the godmothers had sent someone to help. Asterisk. The next day, Gideon slept in, waking only when Brittany finally did. She slept very late because of the healing she'd received right before bed. He watched her as she slowly came awake, something he hadn't been able to do since they'd moved to the ranch on Monday. "Good morning." She slowly blinked at him, stretching a little. "Thank you for healing me last night. I'm not nearly as sore as I should be." "You're very welcome. I can't have my wife broken after only a week of marriage." She laughed. "Where would you get your 7 sons from?" "The line would end, because you're my destiny." She glanced over his shoulder at the clock. "Oh no. You should have been up hours ago." "Nope, because today is Lonnie's first day working with Frank. She's a full-time ranch employee now." "Seriously? No more late nights with the boys?" He shook his head, grinning. "I can't promise there won't be times I'm called out to help with something, but for the most part, my job will now be running the ranch. I'm taking over Dad's study as of Monday morning, and we'll work together for a week or two. Then I'm on my own." "So what's on the agenda for the weekend?" she asked, moving closer to him. He grinned. "I thought maybe we could drive into San Antonio and explore the Riverwalk. It's been years since I've had the chance to go. No one will mind if you just take off? It's the weekend. We have everything in place for me to be able to take off. Dad isn't planning to go anywhere this weekend, and Adam will be around. Next weekend, I'll need to stick here, because Mom and Dad are going to go RV shopping on Saturday." "They're really going to do it?" Brittany was surprised. She expected them to realize they couldn't go anywhere. "They're really doing it." He rolled to the edge of the bed and sat up. "Get your shower, and I'll meet you downstairs. I'm going to rally the troops and make breakfast. I can cook." "So can I shower." He kissed her quickly and got dressed. He was excited about having a fun weekend so he could get to know Madison and Caden better, but more than anything, he was happy to have time off to spend with Brittany. It felt like he'd waited his entire life for them to be able to marry and be together. It was finally time for them. Chapter 10. On Monday, while the kids were at school and Gideon was working with his father, Brittany went up to the attic to explore. She hadn't been able to stop thinking about the microfiche his grandmother had stored up there. She wanted to sit and read everything, learning as much as she could about the fascinating family she'd married into. She found the box with the records, and she carried it down to the car. She knew that the Bagley Library would be the perfect place to do some research and take notes. She might be too busy having babies and helping run the ranch to actually do any writing for the next 30 years or so, but she was going to be ready as soon as the time came. 3 hours later, she was still scrolling through document after document. She had no idea anyone had kept such good records of their family's history. It helped that the McClains had started out as a clan in Scotland, before they were driven from the country because they were believed to be witches. Brittany felt for Gideon's ancestors as she read about the treacherous trip across the water, and the wife of the 7th son was pregnant with her 3rd. Their small sons were still babies as they made the journey. At first, they'd settled in North Carolina, but they had relocated to Texas by 1800. From there the information was even better, and she was excited. She took all the notes she could, with specific names and ages of family members. When she finished, she reloaded the microfiche into the box she'd found it in. When she arrived home, she left the notes and microfiche in the car, and she immediately cooked lunch for both her husband and her father-in-law, her mind filled with the stories she'd read. She couldn't wait to sit down at a computer and type as much as she could remember using her notes. The first story was already taking shape in her mind. She couldn't hide her excitement as the three of them ate lunch together, and Gideon kept looking at her curiously. "What is going on with you?" She shrugged. "Nothing I'm ready to talk about." She couldn't let him know that she was taking on such a big task, because what if she couldn't do it? What if she failed? She didn't want to ruin his belief in her. No, she'd tell him when it was done. As soon as the lunch dishes were done, she went upstairs to one of the empty bedrooms that she'd turned into an office, and she started writing. She hadn't meant to start that day, but the stories were filling her head, and she couldn't keep herself from putting the words down on the computer. She set an alarm on her phone so she wouldn't write too long, and she wanted to yell when it went off. It was time for her to make a huge batch of cookies for all of the people on the ranch. She sighed. Filling Lillian's shoes was going to be even harder than she'd thought. If she couldn't get this story out of her head, she was going to implode. Every day for 3 weeks, she wrote and wrote and wrote. Every minute the kids were at school and Gideon was occupied, she was either thinking about her story or working on it. She did all the cooking she had to do. She didn't exactly slack off, but she was absolutely obsessed, and she didn't know how to go about her day if she wasn't getting her story out. On Friday of her 3rd week writing, she wrote the magic words she'd been dreaming about since she'd started it. The end. Her hands hurt. Her back, shoulders, and neck ached. But the book was done, and that was the only thing that seemed to matter to her. That evening after supper when the kids were in bed, Brittany joined Gideon in the living room where he was watching a movie. She snuggled close to him and rested her head on his shoulder. Every day she trusted him a little more. He seemed to be completely devoted to her, which was what she needed more than anything else in life. "You seem very content this evening," he said. She grinned. "I finished today." "You finished what?" He'd noticed she kept disappearing upstairs, but he hadn't questioned her about it, not wanting her to think he didn't trust her. They were still too fragile for him to question her moves. "My first book." He used the remote to shut the television off and turned to her fully on the couch. "Excuse me?" "I finished my book. Remember when I told you I wanted to write love stories for your ancestors?" Her whole face was lit up with excitement. "Yeah? Well, I wrote the first one. As far back as the research would take me." "Really? That fast?" I couldn't stop the story. Every minute I wasn't at my computer, I was obsessed with what would happen next. It was crazy. He blinked a few times. "When do I get to read it?" She shrugged. "When do you want to read it?" "Now." "You don't have to. I know you're not really interested in reading a romance, but I'm just so excited that I finished. And now I want to write about their 7th son." He laughed. "What are you going to do with these stories?" "I have no idea. What does one do with a story after she finishes it?" "We'll research and figure it out. Mildred may have some connections. The godmothers know everyone." He cupped her face in his hands, looking deeply into her eyes. "You did it. You finished a book. I'm so proud of you." She grinned. "I'm pretty darn proud myself. I've started a lot of books, but this is the first time I was actually able to keep going until I finished. It was like there was something inside me, driving me to finish it. I can't even explain it. We may need to get a housekeeper so you can keep doing what you're passionate about." He loved seeing her as happy as she was at that moment. He couldn't remember ever seeing her face lit up that way, Not since they'd first dated back in high school anyway. You'd do that? Would it be okay? He shrugged. I don't know why not. We can certainly afford a housekeeper, and you seem to need your time free to write. I had no idea it was this big of a deal to you. It hasn't always been, but the last few years, it's been a huge part of my life. It was a way for me to escape my world, but now, it seems to be all-consuming. But I know I need to be a good wife to you. Gideon shook his head. You are a good wife to me. How can you be a good wife or a good mother if you're not happy and fulfilled? This is obviously what you need. I've never seen you look quite so excited about anything. She grinned. I don't think I've ever been quite so excited. I know it's a little bit crazy, but this is truly something I wasn't sure I'd ever accomplish. Then we need to start interviewing for housekeepers right away. You're going to be able to pursue this. It means too much to you. All right. She felt a bit guilty about giving in, but it was what she wanted with everything inside her. I can still do special days with the boys when they need them. He nodded. And you'll still need to. You'll have to find the balance between being a writer and being my wife. Think you can do it? She nodded. I do think so. She looked down at her hands for a moment, and then up at him again. I was unfair to you. How so? He couldn't think of a single thing she'd done wrong in their entire relationship. Well, maybe hitting him with the books, but he'd probably deserved it, though he really couldn't remember now. It was funny how he could remember her hitting him that way, but he couldn't remember what had led up to it. I should have trusted you from the very beginning. You've been nothing but kind and loving toward me and my family, and I've held something that happened a decade ago against you all this time. Brittany frowned. I love you, Gideon, and I trust you as well. You mean the world to me. His blue-gray eyes lit up excitedly. I love you, too. So much I don't think I could ever stop, not even if you wanted me to. He lowered his head and touched his lips to hers softly. You have no idea what it means to me to know that you're now happy in our relationship. I can't believe I ever thought about not marrying you once you asked. I was an idiot. How could I ever be happy without Gideon McClain at my side? Well, I think if you had a computer in front of you and a story in your head. She laughed. I don't think I ever would have been able to write someone else's happily ever after until you gave me my own. Just remember, it's not a one-way street. You gave me my happily ever after as well. Oh, there's one more thing you might want to know. He raised an eyebrow. Yes? I took a pregnancy test this morning. His smile grew wider, though he hadn't been sure that was even possible. And? You're going to be a father around the 1st of February. I need to see a doctor. Or maybe a midwife. How would you feel if I saw a midwife? She asked. Just fine. As long as you let Daniel or me in the room with you, I wouldn't even worry. She laughed. You think you're going to heal me after the baby is born? He shrugged. I don't know why not. What are we going to name our sons? 7 of them. I can't go with alphabetical, because your mother did that. We need to think of something fun. Like all GS. Are there even enough G names to make that work? I have no idea. I think we'd have an easier time with B names. They should all be privileged to get the same first letter as their mother. You're really happy, aren't you? She hadn't been sure if he'd really want a baby so early on in their marriage, not that there was anything she could really do about it. From what she'd been told, there was no birth control that would work if you were married to the 7th son. He nodded. I always knew I'd have children quickly in my marriage and a whole lot of them. You're fulfilling my destiny, but you're doing it in a way that makes me the happiest man on earth. He stood up. Come on. I'm going to read this book of yours, and I'm going to check on my baby. I don't want to risk Madison or Caden coming down for a drink of water and seeing me holding your belly like some sort of circus freak. You're not a circus freak? She shook her head. I'm so disappointed. For some reason, I was sure you were. Think of the draw you'd have when you started healing people and growing plants before people's eyes. She stopped walking. Oh. I just remembered, my mom's African violet is dying again. We can't have that, can we? Brittany shook her head. We certainly can't. Let's go fix it. Gideon grinned. It's a good thing it doesn't hurt me to use my powers, you'd have broken me a dozen times over. Why would I want to be married to a man with special powers if he didn't use them for my amusement? He laughed, shaking his head. You are a mess, Brittany McClain. Is that why I love you so darn much? She shrugged. I think it was something about destiny and me hitting you with books. I think. I might be wrong. He led her to the kitchen windowsill and stuck his finger in the dirt of her African violet. As she watched it grow, she knew it was just like her love for him. It would never stop growing. Epilogue. Brittany couldn't quite contain her excitement. It was the annual fundraiser for the McClain Boys Ranch. I want to buy a quilt. And tacos. I have to get some tacos. Tiffany promised there would be a taco truck this year, even though the other truck backed out. Gideon frowned at her. Her pregnancy had been an easy one so far, but that didn't stop him from worrying. Just let me scam you once, to make sure you're up for this. She rolled her eyes, but sat down and let him run his hand over different parts of her. How's the baby? He closed his eyes and concentrated on the baby inside her, seeing him all curled up in a ball, sucking on his big toe. He's sucking on his toe again. I swear that child is going to be a gymnast. She laughed. And me? Am I still alive? Yes, you're still alive. Let's go. Madison and Caden were waiting for them in the living room. Do we have to stay with you guys? Or can we wander off on our own? Madison asked. Brittany frowned. Make sure you stay in plain sight. Madison had been dating Michael, the younger brother of Maria, Ephraim's wife. I don't want to realize you've taken off somewhere. Madison sighed heavily. I won't. I'll keep an eye on her, Caden volunteered, his eyes filled with mischief. She can't get into any kind of trouble if I'm shadowing her. Gideon nodded emphatically. Great idea. Don't let her out of your sight, even for a minute. Caden saluted Gideon. Yes, sir. After Madison left with Caden right on her heels, Brittany looked at Gideon. That was just plain mean. Gideon shrugged. I'm responsible for her. There will be no messing around on my watch. They stepped outside, and she sighed. I got my cover for my 4th book today. I just wish being pregnant hadn't slowed me down so much. She shook her head. I've finally reached the year 1200 in the books, but I want to go right through to the 20th century. I'm really excited about it. You're growing a person inside you. Give yourself a break. He made sure to walk slowly, certain she was going to fall over something. A rock, if nothing else. There were people everywhere, and while Brittany had attended the fundraiser for 15 years or more, she had never been there as a McClain. The pride she felt in all of the arrangements was fascinating to her. Oh, I see the taco truck. And there's Tiffany. She broke into a half-run as she hurried toward her friend and sister. How are the tacos? Fabulous. They're every bit as good as Taco Buenos. Tiffany bit into a taco, sighing happily. Adam looked at Gideon. Check her out really quick, would you? I think she's too pregnant to attend this thing, but she says she wouldn't miss it for anything. Gideon quickly scanned his sister-in-law under the guise of hugging her. She's fine. Yeah, that's what Daniel said, too, Tiffany said, rolling her eyes. I think every time we're near either of you, he's going to make you check me out. It's not like I'm the first woman to ever have a baby. You're the first woman to ever have my baby, and I love you, so I'm concerned about you. Get used to it. Tiffany sighed, but even as she did, she grinned at Adam, making it clear to anyone that she really didn't mind his overprotectiveness. Melissa joined them. She wasn't yet pregnant, but they all knew it was a matter of time. No one had babies like the McClains did. How are the tacos? Melissa asked. Adam shook his head at Benjamin. All of our wives are obsessed with tacos. Who can blame them? Lillian asked, going to order a taco of her own. Maria wandered over, holding on to Ephraim's arm. She was in her 6th month and having a hard time with it, her blood sugars fluctuating wildly. Ephraim nodded to his brother, who came and hugged her, healing her as much as he could. Each time he or Daniel saw her, they gave her just a bit of a heal. There was no way to heal the diabetes, but they could keep her as healthy as possible. Ephraim looked over at Brittany. How's the baby machine doing today? Brittany wrinkled her nose at Ephraim. He'd taken to calling her that shortly after she'd married Gideon. Before she was even pregnant. I'm fine. She knew there was no way to make him stop, and he could call her worse. Maria smiled at her mother-in-law. Are the tacos good? Adam shook his head. What is with the taco obsession? Hey. I'm a full-blooded Latina. I'm allowed to be obsessed with tacos. Okay, I'll give you that one. Frank and Lonnie walked over, Lonnie waving happily to the others. Brittany, I just finished reading your latest book. When is the next one coming out? Brittany smiled happily. She loved that people were reading her books, and what's more, that they were liking them. It was still a little hard for her to believe that people enjoyed stories that she made up in her head. Yes, they were based a little on actual life, but mostly they were pure fiction. Soon. I just got the cover this morning. Oh. Can I see? Lonnie hurried over beside Brittany to peer at her cover on her phone. I love it. Me too. Brittany tucked her phone back into her pocket. We should go see Natalie over in her booth. I hate that she's sitting there selling her candy while we're walking around having fun. Natalie doesn't mind at all. You know that. Tiffany said, walking over with the others. They were like a giant gang of people walking, several of them pregnant. Brittany couldn't help but wonder what people thought of them. Not that it would change how she acted in any way, but understanding what people thought, and their motivations, helped her write. There's my favorite candy girl. Ephraim said, walking over to Caleb and Natalie in their booth. Natalie seemed to be enjoying selling the candy, but Caleb seemed to be just eating it. Claire walked around the corner of the booth, hand in hand with Daniel. Gang's all here, I see. Where else would we be? Maria asked. We're all so excited about this fundraiser. Claire looked at Brittany. Why aren't you signing books today? You should have a booth as well. I'm afraid people would connect Clan McClain in with the McClains. I have way too much paranormal stuff in my books for anyone to link it. Wouldn't be good. That makes a lot of sense, Lillian said. But I have to say, I love reading every one of them. I don't think you could love reading them half as much as I love writing them. Obviously we're a good team then. Lillian looked all around at the fundraiser. I think this is our best turnout yet. Great job, Tiffany. Tiffany blew on her knuckles before scrubbing them on her shirt. What can I say? I'm good at what I do. You look like you're about to burst. Lillian said. How much longer until I have those granddaughters? Tiffany shrugged. I don't know. Another 3 or 4 weeks probably. I'm sure they're ready to be spoiled by you. Spoil? I'm just going to love them with every fiber of my being. All 7 of the daughters-in-law spoke in unison. Spoil. Lillian laughed. I can't fight this mob. Peter. Peter walked over to her. Yes? They're accusing me of planning to spoil my grandbabies. You know I'd never do that. Yes, dear. You won't spoil them while you're rotting them at all. They all laughed, and Gideon pulled Brittany closer. This was what he'd dreamed of his entire life. Being with the woman he loved and seeing the ranch prosper. If he'd been offered 3 wishes, he'd have to turn them down. He already had everything he wanted and needed right there.